In early 2025, in a place called Gqeberha in the Eastern Cape, Operation Shanela was officially launched. To most South Africans, it seemed like just another announcement, another promise that would fade into the background, like so many before it. People had grown accustomed to such declarations. Every few months, a new strategy would be unveiled, a new on crime declared. Yet, the streets remained the same. Gangs still ruled the townships like kings. So when Operation Shanela was announced, most people shrugged. Another name, another campaign, another speech. But what they didn't know was that this time, something was different. Operation Shanela soon became one of the most successful operations in South Africa's history. This is the story of how South African police brought down the biggest gangs the country has ever known. South Africa has long been battling a deep-rooted crime problem, one that stretches far beyond petty theft and spirals into violent gang activity, human trafficking, illegal mining, and an underground network of organized crime. From the heart of Johannesburg to the rural corners of Mpumalanga, communities have been living under the constant shadow of fear. Gang violence wasn't just something you read about, it was something people lived through day in and day out. By the time 2025 rolled around, the situation had reached a boiling point. Rates were rising, dealers were operating freely in neighborhoods, and criminal networks seemed to be operating like well-oiled machines. And despite years of crackdowns, the criminals always found a way to return, stronger, smarter, and more connected. It became clear something big had to change. The country needed something massive, something that could punch through the layers of corruption, lawlessness, and fear that had taken hold. That's how Operation Shanela was born. This wasn't just another police operation. This was a coordinated national assault on crime. Shanela, which means to sweep in Setswana, was not only symbolic, it described exactly what the South African Police Service, SAAPS, planned to do: sweep through the country and uproot every gang, every syndicate, and every violent criminal hiding in plain sight. But this wasn't put together overnight. The planning behind Operation Shanela started months before the first arrests were ever made. It involved intelligence gathering on a national scale. Police forces from every province, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, the Western Cape, Limpopo, the Free State, and beyond, began compiling lists of wanted suspects, mapping out crime hotspots, identifying illegal operations, and tracking the movements of known gang leaders. This wasn't about chasing small-time thugs. The focus was razor-sharp. Go after the biggest players, take out the backbone of organized crime, and the rest would start to crumble. The strategic importance of Operation Shanela couldn't be overstated. It came at a time when trust in the justice system was dangerously low. Communities felt abandoned, victims felt unheard, and gangsters felt untouchable. Shanela was the government's way of saying enough is enough. It was designed to restore public confidence, bring relief to tormented neighborhoods, and finally give law enforcement the upper hand. Operation Shanela had 3 crystal-clear goals. At its core, the mission was about reclaiming control, about taking back streets, communities, and lives that had been dominated by violent crime and unchecked gang activity for far too long. The first and most pressing goal was to bring down the level of violence that had been tearing through neighborhoods. This wasn't a vague promise. It was a direct assault on attempted robbery and all forms of organized brutality. For too many people across the country, violence wasn't just a headline. It was a daily reality. Families were living in fear, children were growing up in chaos, and communities were being suffocated by the grip of ruthless syndicates. Shanela was designed to tear those networks apart, piece by piece. But dismantling gangs and syndicates meant going after the people who led them. That's where the second focus of the operation came in, tracking down the individuals who had managed to escape justice for years. South Africa's criminal databases were filled with names, faces, and case files that had been left unresolved. Many of these suspects were not just petty criminals. They were hardened offenders, wanted for the most serious crimes that had shocked entire towns, that had traumatized families, robberies that had left workers on the floor, and trafficking operations that preyed on the most vulnerable. Some of these fugitives had changed their names or identities. Others had disappeared thanks to corrupt insiders who helped them stay off the radar. Shanela was about finding them all, wherever they were hiding, and holding them accountable. Every arrest wasn't just another stat. It was a chapter closed, a threat removed, and a promise fulfilled to victims and their loved ones. Still, the operation wasn't only about arrests or statistics. At the heart of it all were the people, ordinary citizens, who just wanted to live without looking over their shoulders. That's why Operation Shanela was as much about presence as it was about force. It sent a message, loud and clear, by flooding high-risk areas with visible policing. Roadblocks began appearing in neighborhoods that gangs had claimed as their own. Foot patrols started walking the streets of townships that hadn't seen uniforms in months. Police vehicles circled hotspots where deals and had become routine. Stop and search procedures were carried out not just for show, but as part of a coordinated effort to flush out and dangerous individuals. Every fire confiscated was one less tool of violence. Every stolen vehicle recovered was a blow to the underground economy that fuels gang operations. Even shutting down illegal mining sites, often overlooked, sent a clear warning to criminal groups trying to profit from the shadows. Every province had its own role to play. Provincial commissioners were placed in charge of their local operations, giving them the power to act fast and tailor the crackdown based on their region's specific crime trends. For instance, Gauteng focused heavily on hijackings and violent assaults, while the Free State honed in on illegal mining rings. In KwaZulu-Natal, human trafficking and illegal were key priorities. But this operation wasn't just about boots on the ground, it was about coordination. Intelligence units, forensic teams, tracking squads, and even drone surveillance were brought into play. Information flowed constantly between local precincts and the national command. As arrests began rolling in, those arrested would often lead officers to even bigger fish, creating a domino effect that broke apart entire networks. And that's exactly what happened. You see, Operation Shanela wasn't just about sending officers into the streets and hoping for the best. This was a national operation built on precision, coordination, and intelligence-driven tactics. From the start, the South African Police Service knew that if they were going to take down the country's biggest gangs, they had to hit them where it hurt. That meant going after their leaders, disrupting their movements, choking their finances, and making it impossible for them to operate in the shadows any longer. So, the police leaned into several key techniques that gave the operation its bite. One of the first tools deployed was targeted tracking operations. These were not random hunts. Officers used tip-offs from informants, surveillance footage, mobile data, and months of intelligence reports to monitor gang leaders and high-ranking members. Using a mix of undercover work and digital tracking, police followed suspects for days, sometimes weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Arrests weren't just made at crime scenes. Many were pulled from safe houses, hideouts, and even public areas where they thought they could blend in. Alongside this, roadblocks became a critical, but these weren't the typical traffic checks you'd see during a public holiday. These were strategic choke points, carefully placed in areas known for gang activity, hijackings, and movement. Officers stopped every vehicle, checked every ID, and searched for illegal, stolen goods or. It wasn't just about catching someone in the act. These roadblocks also disrupted the rhythm of crime. Gangs that once moved or across provinces overnight suddenly found themselves trapped, unable to move without risking arrest. But perhaps the most visible part of Operation Shanela, the part that communities saw and felt immediately, was the high-visibility patrols. Entire squadrons of officers were deployed into gang-ridden neighborhoods, patrolling on foot and by vehicle, both during the day and well into the night. For many communities, this was the first time in months they had seen such a strong police presence. It sent a message, loud and clear, that the streets no longer belonged to the gangs. And it didn't stop there. Stop and search operations were ramped up in hotspots across the country. Officers didn't wait for crimes to happen. They proactively approached suspicious individuals, checked for questioned loiterers, and carried out searches right there on the spot. In townships like Alexandra, Khayelitsha, and Eldorado Park, these searches uncovered illegal fire, stolen property, bags of and even counterfeit documents. Gang members who had grown used to operating in plain sight were now under constant pressure, never knowing when the next officer might tap them on the shoulder. One of the most effective parts of Operation Shanela was its focus on tracing wanted suspects. Many of these individuals had been slipping through the cracks for years. Some had fake passports. Others had crossed provincial borders or changed their identities completely. However, through coordinated intelligence between the Crime Intelligence Unit and local precincts, officers were able to locate these suspects with shocking precision. It didn't matter whether they were hiding in a downtown flat in Pretoria or a shack on the outskirts of Polokwane. The police came knocking, and they didn't come alone. But what truly gave Operation Shanela its structure and firepower was the leadership at the provincial level. Each province wasn't operating blindly or waiting for orders from Pretoria. Instead, provincial commissioners were given the authority and responsibility to lead their local crackdowns based on the specific crime challenges in their regions. They knew their provinces better than anyone else. They understood which gangs held the most power, which neighborhoods were under siege, and which suspects had been evading justice for far too long. In places like the Western Cape, where gang warfare was tearing communities apart, the strategy was surgical. Police focused on disarming the breaking up turf wars, and neutralizing the individuals behind the violence. In Gauteng, where car hijackings and robberies were a daily crisis, officers were stationed at key highways and intersections to intercept stolen vehicles and arrest known hijackers. The Eastern Cape focused on cracking down on cross-border while the Free State turned its attention to illegal mining syndicates that were exploiting local resources and terrorizing workers. The success of these provincial operations came from one key principle: local knowledge, national coordination. Provincial teams weren't operating alone. They were constantly in contact with national headquarters, feeding information up the chain, while also receiving broader intel that helped connect the dots across regions. A suspect arrested in Durban might be linked to a ring operating in Johannesburg. A stolen vehicle recovered in Mpumalanga could lead investigators straight to a gang operating out of Soweto. Everything was connected, and now the police were acting like it. The careful, secret planning behind Operation Shanela all led to one of the biggest arrests from a single operation ever seen in South Africa. In just a short period, the operation led to a staggering 16,718 arrests across the country. But this wasn't just a random sweep of low-level offenders. These arrests struck at the heart of organized crime, revealing how deep-rooted the problem had become, and just how serious the police were about ripping it out, root and stem. Among these figures were the nearly 3,000 wanted suspects who had been on the run for serious and violent crimes. We're talking about hardened criminals who were wanted for attempted and robberies. Some had been evading justice for years, moving from town to town, hiding in informal settlements, or protected by fear within their own communities. But this time, the law caught up with them. Take the 122 individuals arrested for example. These weren't crimes of passion or misunderstandings gone wrong. Many of these were cold, calculated linked to gang disputes and territory takeovers. The province of Gauteng led the charge with 36 arrests, while Eastern Cape followed closely with 29. These numbers weren't just digits. They represented breakthroughs in cases that had haunted families, frightened neighborhoods, and in some cases, gone unsolved for years. The shed didn't stop there. Another 112 suspects were arrested for attempted, many of whom were tied to violent clashes between rival gangs or failed assassinations that still left victims badly wounded. These arrests showed that the operation wasn't just looking backward at past crimes, but was actively preventing future shed. Then there was the deeply painful issue of violence. 223 suspects were arrested for, and the province of KwaZulu-Natal stood out with a staggering 80 arrests in that category alone. These were not small-time criminals. These were predators, many of whom had slipped through the cracks and reoffended, believing they'd never be brought to justice. Now, they were finally behind bars. Assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm was another area where police made serious progress. With 1,845 arrests, officers managed to detain suspects who had inflicted brutal violence, often as part of gang initiations, extortion tactics, or intimidation. These were the enforcers, the foot soldiers, the ones who did the dirty work, while the gang bosses stayed in the shadows. But Operation Shanela didn't just focus on violent crimes. It also took aim at the lifeblood of the gang economy. Gangs don't survive on and violence alone. Their power often comes from the control of the trade, and with 835 dealers arrested, police sent a clear message that the days of open houses and brazen street dealing were coming to an end. These arrests were complemented by the detention of 2,282 individuals for possession, and the Western Cape alone accounted for 1,088 of those. That region, long plagued by turf wars over distribution, suddenly saw a massive disruption in its illegal trade. Firearms were another major focus of the crackdown. Gangs rely on access to illegal weapons to maintain dominance, carry out hits, and spread fear. During the operation, 129 suspects were arrested for the illegal possession of firearms, and again, KwaZulu-Natal topped the list with 36 arrests. Every gun confiscated wasn't just a weapon taken off the street, it was a potential life saved. But crime doesn't stop at trades or running. Another layer of the criminal network came in the form of undocumented and illegal activities operated by foreign nationals. While not every foreign national is involved in crime, some had crossed into South Africa without proper documentation and were contributing to criminal syndicates operating with impunity. 1,341 illegal foreign nationals were arrested, many of them found during raids on gang-run operations, unlicensed businesses, and human trafficking rings. Even behind the wheel, Operation Shanela didn't ease up. 419 drivers were arrested for drunken driving, with Gauteng again recording the highest number at 114. Drunk driving might not sound as menacing as gang wars or trafficking, but the reality is that it claims lives every day. By cracking down on this, police were sending another message. Lawlessness in any form would no longer be tolerated. While the numbers from Operation Shanela were impressive, it was the individual operations, the moments where the law caught up with those who thought they were untouchable, that truly showed how serious this crackdown was. These weren't ordinary arrests. These were game-changing moments that shook criminal networks to their foundations. One of the most heartbreaking yet powerful breakthroughs came from the province of Mpumalanga. In a small community still haunted by the horror of a tavern that claimed the lives of 8 innocent people, justice finally arrived. For weeks, residents lived in fear, traumatized by the cold-blooded nature of the attack and frustrated by the silence that followed. But then, in a carefully planned operation, police closed in on their prime suspect, a 39-year-old man believed to be directly involved in the massacre. When officers entered his hideout, they found a pistol and ammunition, believed to be connected to the The arrest didn't just remove a dangerous individual from the streets, it brought a long-awaited sense of relief to families who had lost loved ones in a place where they were supposed to feel safe. Illegal mining, another dangerous pillar of South Africa's underground economy, also faced major disruption. In the Free State province, which has long been a hotspot for illicit mining operations, police conducted a series of raids targeting known hotspots and hidden entrances to these illegal mines. The conditions were treacherous. Dark, unstable tunnels, often held up with makeshift timber, where armed groups worked around the clock, digging for profit without regard for safety or law. Through coordinated sweeps, 62 suspects were arrested. These were not just desperate men looking for a living. Many were part of larger criminal syndicates that used illegal mining to fund other activities such as trading, smuggling, and bribery. Dismantling this network meant cutting off one of their key sources of income. The success of Operation Shanela wasn't just measured in arrests, it was seen in what was taken off the streets. During the course of these operations, police seized a staggering 129 illegal firearms, weapons that had fueled countless acts of violence. Alongside them, officers confiscated over 1,100 rounds of ammunition, each bullet a potential life lost, had it not been intercepted. These were the tools used in drive-by gang wars, and armed robberies. Every weapon taken meant one less chance for a tragedy. Then there were the vehicles. 65 hijacked and stolen cars recovered from various provinces. These weren't just stolen goods, they were often used in crimes ranging from kidnappings to cash-in-transit heists. Tracking and recovering them not only disrupted criminal operations, but also helped return property to rightful owners and restored a sense of justice to those who had been violently robbed. The sheer scale of Operation Shanela sparked a wave of reactions across the country. It wasn't just another police initiative. It felt different. The numbers alone, thousands of arrests, hundreds of weapons seized, human trafficking rings dismantled, were enough to turn heads. But what truly caught people's attention was the message it sent, that crime would no longer go unanswered, and that the rule of law was finding its voice again. In the halls of government, the operation was widely praised. Officials, from ministers to provincial leaders, lined up to commend the bravery and precision of the South African Police Service. For them, this was a rare win in a country often overwhelmed by headlines of unchecked violence and public frustration with safety. They viewed the operation not just as a successful crackdown, but as a model for how intelligence-driven policing could be rolled out in the future. Minister of Police Gqeberha, a key figure in pushing for more aggressive action against violent crime, didn't hold back in expressing his support. He pointed to the arrest of more than 16,000 suspects as a clear sign that law enforcement could still deliver results when given the tools, resources, and political backing it needed. He spoke publicly about restoring public confidence, emphasizing that no gang or criminal syndicate should ever believe they are beyond reach. According to him, Operation Shanela showed that the SAPS was prepared to strike deep into the heart of organized crime, not just at the edges. Within communities that had grown accustomed to living in fear, the operation sparked something rare: hope. In areas where gangs had long dictated what time shops closed, which streets were safe to walk at night, and who could speak freely, the sight of heavily armed police units moving in with confidence was a welcome change. Local residents expressed cautious optimism. Mothers who had once begged their children not to stay out too late began to believe that their streets might finally be turning a corner. Taxi drivers, street vendors, and business owners, people whose lives were directly impacted by criminal activity, shared stories of how the sudden drop in visible gang activity made them feel like the system was finally working for them, not against them. But even amid the praise, there were critical voices, some louder than others, who refused to let the operation pass without deeper scrutiny. Ian Cameron, a prominent community safety advocate and chairman of the Portfolio Committee on Police, raised a point that hit at the heart of South Africa's long-standing justice problem. Yes, thousands had been arrested. Yes, it was a relief to see suspects rounded up, weapons confiscated, drugs pulled off the street. But what came next? Cameron warned that the country couldn't afford to celebrate arrest numbers if they didn't translate into convictions. He called out the revolving door of the justice system, where suspects are arrested only to return to the streets weeks or months later due to procedural failures, lack of evidence, or delayed prosecutions. His concern wasn't just a technical one, it was deeply emotional. For victims of violent crime, seeing their attackers arrested offers hope, but seeing them walk free without consequence reopens wounds and destroys trust. Cameron's point was simple: arresting a suspect is only the beginning. Without strong, airtight cases, coordinated prosecution, and efficient court proceedings, the victories of Operation Shanela risked becoming hollow. This concern was echoed in some communities, especially those who had seen similar operations in the past flare up brightly, only to fade out just as quickly. There was a growing understanding that while law enforcement had done their part in capturing the suspects, the next phase, ensuring these criminals were successfully prosecuted and kept off the streets, was equally important.